Live streaming is on.
And with that, we are back. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Talk the Plank, the Pirate Movement's #1 podcast. Today, we have special guests. Unfortunately, our attending guest could not make it tonight, so we have backup plans. I would like to, not that you guys are ever backups, you are first in my heart always. But real quick, just to give brief introductions, my name is Jolly Mitch DeVillo of the United States Pirate Party, your captain speaking. And if the guests in the room wanted to introduce themselves, we'll get going.
This is Dustin Etz from the Virginia and the DC area. Uh,
Is my microphone working? Okay.
it is indeed.
My name is M3 Mikey. I'm from Ohio, land of bean, cows, and corn.
Fantastic. Thank you kindly. Well, ladies and gentlemen, today was going to be a conversation on open source ecology with Marcin Jakubowski. Unfortunately, like I said, he could not attend today. However, that does not mean we can't still talk about open source and other things important to the Pirate Party. Dustin, I know you said you had a few things. I don't know if you wanted to kick us off with anything, but otherwise, I'm excited to talk about this. So, folks, don't think that this is just because we don't have the Pirate Party at Grease on doesn't mean it's not an exciting episode. I'm actually really looking forward to talking about this. Dustin?
Yep. So I guess I'll just share or attempt to share my entire screen. See if that works. Looks kind of crazy, probably. So I guess we should probably talk about the open source ecology stuff first. If Marcin ends up showing up, hopefully he could talk about this much better than I can. But I mean, I did not know this existed until a little while ago when Morgan, who is also in the Pirate Party, brought it up. And I think it's really cool. Personally, I was also working on like a similar goal to open source ecology already in my spare time. So it was just really cool to find someone else that already, I guess, developed stuff in a very different direction with a similar goal. And it seems like they did have they had a global village construction set, and they did a lot of work towards a lot of different products. And they successfully have completed at least 4 projects and gotten a lot of other ones a large amount of the way. And potentially, if they got more help, they could probably get those all the way across the line. So they had completed a 3D printer. I know they recently made some like open source houses and gave away all of the ways to do that. Compressed earth brick press for making compressed earth bricks for building houses. And a power cube, which, yeah, I do not remember what the power cube is, to be honest with you. But I saw the compressed earth brick press, look through it, and the micro house 3D printer, and they're all solid. My understanding is they've done a lot of work towards a lot of other things as well, and they all look very reasonable, I think. So long as things are open source, you can have feasibly co-ops that can take over things back from monopolies, which is amazing. You see the link to what all of their stuff is up here. And they have the open source available. If you look into here. So I did find it earlier. But they have the open source on here. I just can't remember where it is exactly because I did not look through this sufficiently in advance. But they've got a lot on here. They've got resources. Yeah. They've also got like just a academy to put people through if you don't want to just look through the existing open source stuff, or you don't have the expertise to. They are offering classes to teach you the expertise to read through the open source if you don't already have it from going through an education related to that. So there's a Seed Eco Home. Oh, how to build or acquire one. So, problem of an undersupply of housing, may build more housing is the solution to that. So they gave, okay, here it is. So this is the actual source for the house itself. It's got all the CAD files you need for everything related to making the house, all the tools you'll need in FreeCAD format so that you can actually use it to make things. And if we can get a good production system working with 3D printing and like some, oh gosh, words today, like Millennium Machines, mini mills, then we could just make all of these. A random person could just make a house relatively easily without any commercial inputs really needed for the most part. So these are like finished products that they've actually built in the real world. So you can see the house they built. It's got solar, all that kind of stuff. So they've done some really cool stuff. It's a turnkey for how to build a house in an ecologically friendly way. Yeah, the thing is, there's tons of different projects around open source and tons of open source communities out there. It's not just open source ecology. There's scientists and engineers for just about anything you can imagine out there. And I could go through more of those, but I would say the most key ones for people to know in general are just knowing about CNC machines and knowing about 3D printers, which I think is why those were some of the focuses for them as well, because I think many people know having those two technologies is the key to unlocking like building virtually anything for the most part. So that's why they probably focused on that. But so open source ecology, from what had been shown, they'd successfully built an open source 3D printer. And there's also another group called Voron that had also built an open source printer. And their documentation is very, very robust. And they have a very good community on a Discord. And they will help you out with like anything you need towards building one of their devices from scratch, from parts you can buy from anywhere, for the most part. And Voron is great, in my opinion. It's very robust, very well documented. There's also a suite of different open source software that you can use if you have open source 3D printers. So like you can combine Mainsail with Kirimoto to fully design any product purely in the web, and then basically print it. And then if you have FreeCAD, you can just download FreeCAD for free, and you can do complete computer-aided design 100% for free, take the product to the market, whatever. And there's lots of existing products out there too. So like Thingiverse, there's a number of different websites like this out here, but it's kind of like the equivalent of GitHub, but for 3D printable and CNCable stuff. So like you got all these little things, like a lot of stuff these days that you see at farmers markets, not all farmers markets, but some of them that look cool like this. A lot of them are straight like CNC or 3D printed stuff, because it's not easy right now, but it's relatively easy to get a 3D printer or CNC machine up and running and then just print stuff. There's usually a little bit of work to do after the fact, but it's pretty good. A lot of people just use it for making like figures and decorative stuff. But there's also the case that people there's the potential to use it for much more advanced things. A lot of companies are making more advanced versions of CNC 3D printers for making things that are metal, ceramic, anything you can mention, like out of the box in one go. But in my opinion, sorry, I feel like I'm talking too much.
No. No, you're on target. You're on target. The advantage of the CNC is that the time barrier to expertise and metalworking is shrinking, and so you can get a home system now that was unobtainium in say 1995, and like the Industrial Revolution equivalent was metal casting, where people were pouring their own patterns and forms and making machinery. And so this is the digital next step.
Definitely. I definitely agree. And other people have been doing really cool stuff too. I forgot to look up an example of this in advance, but there are people who've been using 3D printing and CNC for, like you said, metalwork basically too. And there's been some limited amount of success, but most of those were at home things rather than like in-depth scientific endeavors to try and make it work. So I think there's a lot of potential there if we put serious research and engineering into that. Especially if we automate that away with some of the currently existing simulation software. So, for example, FreeCAD has some limited amount of finite element method simulations built into it, but it's not as robust as other like complete multi-physics systems. So there's still potential there to, I guess, make custom simulation systems that go from first principles up, as well as from first principles, meaning from the quantum level, using density functional theorem up to determine like experimental materials that don't necessarily exist in reality, but you're just trying to invent materials. That's a modern route towards making things these days. So we could integrate that with something like FreeCAD and then have an understanding of if we need to make this product, regardless of whether it is microscopic or large. I mean, in terms of normal 3D printers and CNC machines, all we're going to get down to is like, I think 0.001 millimeters or something, or 0.002 millimeters, because that's a physical limit. But below that, there are valid research routes towards going lower, even with common materials, I would say, or argue, using like you prefab some nanomaterials with laser ablation in a liquid, and then, or laser ablation in water. Like you could make nanoparticles, basically embed them into something like wax, and then you can use cheap lasers to melt the wax into the shape you want, and then use vapor deposition, chemical vapor deposition, or physical vapor deposition to deposit small amounts on top of that, and melts off the wax, and you've got like potential open source way to feasibly have anyone anywhere locally make microchips and stuff like that. Is a thought.
Well, it's a long way off. I mean,
yeah, 3D printers and CNC is here.
Traditional manual machining on lathes, your diameter specification for grinding is -0 + 3. So, I mean, that's 3 thousandths, and that's the anticipated error in the machine and process. And then if you want precision greater than 3,000ths, it goes to a separate grinding process. So, you know, if you're doing mold making for plastics creation, urethanes casting, 1,000ths is probably going to be okay for a lot of stuff.
Right.
So, the practical and good enough is now within the realms of easy to achieve. I'm a long time self-taught metal worker. I went to trade school. I worked in the industry, and there are thousands of hobbyists, dozens of web pages, and it all comes down to fundamental, frequently asked questions and stumbling blocks. And it boils down to: can you hold it? Can you cut it? Can you measure it? And if you've got those three basics, then you can work on the material. So you're talking about additive manufacturing, whereas subtractive manufacturing is like the original old school. You also have now laser engraving, which can do some pretty amazing stuff. And the cost on laser engravers is now dropping such that you can buy homeowner versions instead of a big industrial laser.
Real quick, I just wanted to interject and just say that, again, what a shame that Martian isn't here, only because his story of why he started all this, I thought was perhaps the most fascinating, and perhaps something that not only we as pirates in the Pirate Party, but just in general, what people can learn from it, was that Martian had a PhD and realized he doesn't have any life skills, so to speak. He doesn't know how to grow food. So he goes out and I believe he buys a farm in Missouri, I think it was. His tractor, buys a tractor, it breaks, he pays to fix it, it breaks again. Suddenly he realizes he's broke too. And he realizes, maybe I can just build my own tractor. And not only did he build his own tractor, he built it in such a manner that he was able to get industrial efficiency out of what he realized was parts he had, or parts he was able to build. And the design he made open source and available to everybody, so anyone was able to build the tractors and farm equipment and things that he did. And the thing he stated was that the ability that anyone then is going to be able to, not everyone can grow food, but everyone can grow food. Everyone has that ability to do so. And some people may not have the economic means or the nowhere to start. But something like this, it provides an opportunity for anyone to come in and not only learn from it, but if someone comes in and sees like, oh, actually, I think I came up with a design I think you guys should see, they are able to contribute it to it. That's the beauty of open source. And when I see a project like this, I often think that it doesn't have to be limited to what he's done. I think that this concept can be spread throughout anything that we do. We say sharing is caring, and it's such a true term, because why keep this knowledge that you've realized it's all to yourself? Or unselfishly, and this is where I have to applaud Martian, is he realized, like, I can share with everyone instead of trying to make a buck off this. And I'm sure he's made some money off it, but it's the idea that he's allowed it to be open to the public and available to all. And it's something that needs to be applauded. And it's something that I think can be done in other fields in the world. And I think as the Pirate Party, we should be focusing more on open source opportunities. I think that it's one of the things we were founded on was free and open source. So I think returning to our roots is a beautiful thing.
I'll give you an example about something I'm enthusiastic about open source. I had a dishwasher break. I bought a brand new dishwasher, paid $1,000 for it. 2 years later, the keypad didn't work. It would have been $800 if I paid for the service calls to have a technician come out and replace my keypad. What was broke on it was a little bitty plastic covered metal wire set, and all it needed was like a 10-cent part, but they wouldn't sell it to you. They would have to sell you a $300 panel. And so, the first person to copy that thing and say, hey, I can sell you this for $3, would save all the time and energy somebody spent building that washer machine. Instead of it being a hunk of junk, it can be repaired. And that's what really excites me about open source is that, the financial burdens of being locked behind a paywall to repair your stuff can be removed.
Absolutely. And I think most people very firmly want that. Like it's something that's hurt a lot of people financially and then their livelihood many times. I think almost anyone who lives paycheck to paycheck. I think, and it's like a lot of the things companies lock behind paywalls are not things they invented either. It's not always the case, but in many, many cases, it takes very minimal effort for someone with the relevant expertise to like make something available. And it's almost never the case that you would not have a job by doing so. You could just organize in a slightly different way.
In the 60s, one of the original kind of open source things was a company called Heathkit, and they sold kits for you to build an appliance. And I remember my dad on weekends soldering together a TV, and he did because he bought the Heathkit and he soldered all the little things together. So, if they could make it work back then, maybe with the 3D printing model, they can make something similar work now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like some of the things on Thingiverse and stuff like that, like there was one that was like literally a vacuum pump. I don't know if it's on this one or another one of these sites. People make some incredible things that are 3D printable that actually work. I cannot find the particular one I was looking for, but there was one that was actually very, very well put together. And about it working and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. And there's also lots of virtually any field you could think of, there's open source stuff for already. I think plenty of engineers and scientists know the world's going to a worse place and open source is becoming more common, but it's still, I mean, even if there's tons of people contributing to open source, making open source communities and stuff like that, it's still the case that virtually all of them are community projects that don't really have any funding. So even when they successfully make things, like nobody hears about it. And you have to specifically go to open source channels and stuff to even know it exists. Like Simple FOC, like they made like a way to apply modern field of control for stepper motors, which is the foundation for both the electric motors you'd use for a 3D printer, which is how I learned about FOC and Simple FOC, the open source software for doing it.
Yep.
And it's also the core for how you run a EV car. So it's amazing the amount of things that are open source and out there. Um, There's like an open source hardware association with all kinds of certified open source hardware projects all over the place. You could just look through all their different stuff that they've certified.
One of the things about the patent program was you were never supposed to be able to patent a science. And so basically what happens is if something is competitive but they don't have it, they get new patents. And one of the things that always surprised me is patents on engines, because I started reading up on patents on engines, and in 1928 there were patents on 6-cycle engine processes, and somebody had discovered that if you simply evacuate the cylinder and cool the cylinder instead of an immediate combustion cycle, with 6 cycles instead of 4, and a gasoline engine, you got a 40% fuel economy and power bonus. And with diesel, they would inject distilled water and extract a cycle with steam. Well, you can't really easily find those patents anymore, but you can find new patents on the process where somebody actually has control of it.
So they patented something that was already patented using a control schema, using electronics for a control system on it.
I didn't read the new control mechanics, but the 4-cycle was easy to machine and set up with cams, but the 6-cycle was not, and that was probably why it didn't go into production back then. But with electronic controls, yes, they could certainly much easier achieve the same thing now. It's just, when you look at fuel economy, they say, no, that's not possible. No, that's not feasible. No, that's not economic. And one of the things they said that they couldn't do for years was stratified charge engines. Well, as soon as the U.S. said, okay, you have to hit this fuel economy standard, all the engine companies produced a stratified charge engine. So their truthiness is suspect.
Yeah, you have to suspect the truthiness of what companies say whenever profits are involved with one group or another.
Which, again, not to say that this is going to ever completely replace profit margins or profiteering. However, you have to figure that this is an uphill battle that's going to have to be fought, because this isn't something that is necessarily a money-making venture. This is a communal adventure. This is something that people put into because they want to help others, not because they want to make money off of others for themselves. So this is probably going to be something that gets fought tooth and nail and not just this in particular, just in general, open source. So I feel until people can figure out, or until the big corporations can figure out how to profit off open source to the best of their ability, which I'm not sure they'll ever actually figure that out, then they're not going to be proponents of it, which means we have to be the louder proponents versus our opponents. And, when I hear open source, to be completely honest with you, if removing myself from the Pirate Party, before I ever got involved, open source, I know what it means, but does a layman know what it means? Does if you took a random person off the street, if you said, "Hey, do you know what open source is?" Do they understand that concept? And where I don't think that that's an issue on the front of they don't get it, they never will, because I don't think that's true. I think this is sort of like the internet, in the sense that, people didn't have the internet and people, it took a minute before households had a computer in every household. I think once people understand open source, no one's going to be against it except for the people that can't make money off it. So I think it's up to not just us as the U.S. Pirate Party and pirates within it, but just us in general to continue to promote open source and push open source, because this is something that can not just change lives but save lives. So I think it's important to have conversations like these. So I just wanted to throw that out there and just put it out there as a statement of appreciation that we continued on with this episode and the topic at hand. I do believe we still have roughly 15 minutes, 14 minutes before I'm gonna call the podcast. So Dustin, I know you said you had a few things, and if there was something you guys want to continue talking about open source or stay on the topic, or with our 15 minutes, we can handle it however. Being Virginia and Ohio, you guys are close enough, only a West Virginia away from each other. What is what's going on in your guys' state? Is there any open source or pressing news in general that you guys wanted to discuss, since we have the floor?
There's a makerspace in Cincinnati that I used to attend, and they do lots of good stuff. And basically the level of generalism, or having to do a whole lot of small skills, has kind of disappeared while people specialize. And so, if you look at our nation's founding, there were semi-independent farms where you had to do everything that you needed to do to survive the winter all on your own. But now, you go work for somebody else, you buy your groceries in the supermarket. And so, the open source and the specialist versus the generalist is kind of a big, big topic. But, otherwise, Ohio is just crazy compared to Virginia.
Dustin, do you have do you want to back up that claim?
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't know too much about, like, I live more in the DMV area, so that's definitely not representative of all of Virginia. But and for people who do not know, the DMV just means like the DC metro area, so like it bleeds out into Maryland and Virginia a little bit. Yeah, there's, I guess, makerspaces and farmers markets though are really, I think, key if we want open source to thrive. Like, that's where local businesses get started in a lot of cases, and it's where we probably should have local businesses be started. We should have more of them. We should empower people to make more local businesses. I don't think it'll ever be the case that monopolies suddenly 100% adopt and support open source. I think for the most part, they were all forced to, the ones that did adopt open source, because they were falling behind, honestly. Because there were just too many engineers doing open source, and they had to adopt the licenses or fall behind competitors. So just the fact that so many scientists and engineers push for open source has forced companies to go in that direction to some extent. And in a lot of places, they're trying to subvert those licenses, make them closed source again, enforce closed source stuff, and like erode communities, it seems like, stuff like that. So there's a lot of cases where communities die and have to like come back from the dead under a different name. And it's unfortunate, but I guess it's part of the way things are these days. Because companies do not want open source communities to exist in a lot of cases. And you kind of have to have the whole back and forth a little bit. But there's open source suites like Odoo and other stuff that you can have Odoo for all of your business suite. There's tons of other like similar softwares you can use for open source business and start out your own local business at a farmer's market, maker's market. Just sell simple stuff at first and work your way up. Start with a 3D printer. It costs maybe $100, $300 if you buy used with a 3D printer, and then work your way up, learn some CNC. Just do it as a hobby and sell things maybe at the farmer's market if you have free time. Learn that, and then maybe learn mold making. I'd like to help work on open source projects for research and integrating mold making into FreeCAD at some point, if they allow me to like help make that module or something, or help contribute towards making it. But I've been working on open source research software to try and make generally material science stuff more accessible and other things more accessible. And I know there's lots of other people who work on similar things. Like Simple FOC, Voron Design makes 3D printers. Mainsail is a type of software for running your 3D printer or CNC. And then stack that with Curimoto, FreeCAD. There's easy training for cooperatives, which is a great way to scale up from a small business to a larger business using just community movement, and cheap stuff like CNC and 3D printer. And then for open source, there's tons of open source research groups, but ARXIV from Cornell University is pretty solid. They've got lots of different open source papers on stuff. And if you're trying to, I guess there's tons of resources. Libraries often have like open access maker spaces to some extent, and there's larger maker spaces you can go to and pay money to go to. And then there's free resources for learning how to run a co-op business. Like if you go to cooperativesfirst.com, you can see there's like courses and workshops. They're free. So like you go to Intro to Co-ops, and it'll guide you through different stuff. And then there's Odoo. And you can see they've got all kinds of business stuff. And then what we've been working on also is a way to automate mesh networking so that you can have your own automated intranet. That way you can not get surveilled and make community level internet equivalents basically easily without the need for high skill sets. And lots of people have worked on similar projects, stuff like that. It's different from crypto in the sense that it's physical meshing between nearby devices, not encryption based. Well, there's encryption, but it's just encryption as a routing method with something called Reticulum. And then using Kubernetes and Docker, we can automate putting on stuff like Odoo, Curimoto, Mainsail, and stuff like that onto virtualized versions and virtualized routers, network resources. Theoretically, you can just put it all on like a $50 cheap mini desktop, plug in LoRa USB, Wi-Fi USB for like $20, $30. And then you mesh network with all the people who are your neighbors, whatever. And it's secure. You have a separate layer from your normal internet provider. And there's all kinds of projects you can get involved in based on what your background is, or just start an open source oriented business and make your community better. The skills we learn along the way will help everyone regardless. I don't know. I'm throwing a pitch out here at this point. Sorry. But I think there's ways for us to do dependency tracing on who contributes to open source. So it's not true that you can't make a profit off of open source, even for research and engineering. There's a way of proving who did what work and how big of contributions those are, even while having everything completely open. And we have the technology to trace it effectively without people being able to fabricate that. And yeah, really, if you look into things, there's ways we can structure all of this stuff without holding the information hostage. It doesn't mean we should necessarily make open source nuclear weapons or things that are particularly dangerous, but the means of survival would be nice. It doesn't have to be nice things. It could just be locally producible things that make us able to live in a modern method without being subjugated by a monopoly or another. That would be nice, not to live under someone or another's foot and have the actual potential to compete in a market at the local level, no matter who you are, which I don't think is a reality currently, at least from my perspective. You have to, you have to work for one particular monopoly or another or contribute towards them to be able to survive currently. And personally, I don't like that. So yay, open source. And we can refine better methods if more people actually make companies around that contribute.
And Dustin, I actually think you're spot on. I feel like the thing that open source does best is not what it provides, but it's what it allows you to do. It allows you to, if you feel, for example, we go back to the farming, which was open source ecology's, baby to begin with. If you choose to say, I want to get a farm going and I want to, I want to grow and I want to be able to eat food I harvested or sell crops I grew myself, whatever it may be, and you build a tractor and you build whatever, it's not everyone's going to do that. It's just giving people the opportunity that want to do that to do that. And I think one of the things that it eliminates, not completely, is the economic hurdle that a lot of people have to, leap into. Farm equipment costs thousands of dollars. It is not cheap. So the idea that people can build it and still get industrial quality out of what they were able to open source create, that's a beautiful thing. And that's something that, why it's almost the old phrase that, give a man a fish, you feed him a day, teach a man to fish, you feed him a lifetime. And I feel like giving people the opportunity to not only learn about open source, but learn what they can do with open source, that's life-changing. And I think that that's something important that as we move forward in the future, it's something I'm glad that the United States Pirate Party hasn't forgotten. It was foundational to our founding. It was foundational to the entire movement. And I'm glad it's still something that we, spend time to focus on, because it does mean a lot, and if it didn't mean so much, it wouldn't have been one of the first things we adopted as a party all the way back in 2006. So I want to thank you guys for coming today. Dustin, thank you so much for having everything. We are quickly approaching the 45-minute mark, which is, I do try to keep the hard line on it.
All right.
However, the floor is yours, gentlemen. If you guys want to give any closing statements, you guys rock. Just either of you, Dustin, Mikey, you have the floor.
Thank you for letting me speak. It was a pleasure. Catch you guys next time.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. It was great to have your perspective, because I do not have the trade expertise, that's for sure. I think I'll probably drop it to the YouTube channel and try to put down links to different open source and co-op stuff for people to reference after this. So I guess look for that is something I would say. And I hope everyone has a future free of being subjugated by a monopoly if you so wish to live that way, and can have a nice life with a free economy. Yeah.
Dustin, dare I say, amen. Folks, that was another edition of Talk the Plank. Thank you so much for coming in. We will be back in 2 weeks' time. Who is our guest? Shut up. Be there and find out. Thank you guys so much for coming. As always, vote pirate and victory.